So, what is the future of money? This is a question that I have pretty much dedicated the entire year or about entire year to trying to figure out. And I'm going to share today what I have learned. Hey, Molly here. Today I'm going to talk about the future of money. And if you've been a follower of this channel for a while, you've noticed that I haven't been making many videos. And that's partly because I was on this sort of quest to understand what is the future of money and help other people understand like economic principles and sort of things about the blockchain world that I felt like would be helpful for everybody in this sort of journey to make sense of our financial system and what's coming next. And I got to this place where I feel like almost everything that we have understood about the world is like not true. And there's a lot of lies and a lot of things are going away. And this new system that's coming, it almost seems like fantasy to describe. And so while I have regularly conversations with friends of mine and kind of people who share these views, I've been very reluctant to kind of make videos about them because sometimes when I say some of these things out loud, like they seem kind of crazy. And I was like, is it worth it for me to kind of share all this stuff that I've been learning if it means I'm going to take a bunch of heat? So for a while, I was kind of like, you know what? I don't really know if there's a point to that. But something in me has been pushing me to put a lot of content about this type of stuff on Twitter. And people have asked for me to make videos that kind of relate to this new direction. So, what have I learned around the future of money? So, let's first talk about what our current money world is so that you can understand why it's so messed up and warped and twisted. So, right now, money, dollar, I'm Americans, we'll just use dollars, but this applies to, I think, pretty much every current country, especially those part of the Western banking system. Our dollars are debt. So dollars are created when loans are issued. And a lot of loans, for most part, are things like mortgages, credit cards, car loans. So if a bank goes and issues a mortgage, which is a loan to a person to buy a house generally, then that money is created and it is introduced into the money supply. And it's digital money, right? So like if you were to go get a mortgage, which is kind of a loan, and they give you this money, you don't like get all this cash to go pay the buyer of the house. It's all done electronically, digitally. And so it's very easy to create new money because they just literally add it to like a accounting ledger. It's created out of nothing. Now it used to be, and this is called fractional reserve lending, and it used to be that you had to have like a percentage of those assets to issue a loan. So for example, if a bank had $1 million, they could issue $10 million worth of loans. Like they had to have 10% in reserve. And people who are pro fractional reserve lending say that this is necessary if you want to grow the economy, that if you are limited to only the current money supply and there's not a lot of money, then like how do people grow if it's not available? Whatever, I'm not here to argue about the merits of fractional reserve lending because during COVID, they made that reserve requirement go to zero. So banks had to have nothing in reserve to issue loans. So they could literally issue infinite amount of loans, which is where a lot of the PPP money came from, a lot of the idle, like there was a lot of loans that were issued during that time as stimulus or as relief that were created out of nothing. So if the banking system does not have to have any reserves, they can issue as many loans as they want and they can take the money that they have and use it for different purposes. Like they don't have to take consumer deposits and issue them as loans. They can just go and invest that stuff in their own projects or whatever banks do with that money. So what this means though is that if you look at something like the United States' debt, people like my husband has been very obsessed with like the debt. How are we going to pay off the debt? And you realize that the debt will never be paid off because there wouldn't be any money then. Like there would that's the whole bizarre thing about it, that if the money is created when loans are issued, if those loans get paid off, that money, it kind of disappears. And that was hard for me to understand at first because I'm like, if I am a bank and I loan you $100 and then you take that $100 and you go spend it at a store and you and that store then pays their employees with it, and that employee then goes and buys food with it, that money is kind of like trickled out throughout the economy. So even if I paid off the original loan, or if the original loan was paid off back to me, there's still that money out there. And this is where it gets a little complicated, because I think it takes a while for that money to fully be removed out of the system, which is why my take is that the banking system has these things called the repo facility, the reverse repo facility, where the banks will pull money out of circulation and hold it, which is in essence removing this debt money from circulating. And now, if the debt got paid off, they have removed that money from circulation. So that is a way to deal with the inflation problem of having too much money printed, is you, one, get those loans paid off, and two, you remove money from the supply so that like the trickle down effect or whatever is taken out. But this still means that like you couldn't ever pay off all the debt, because then all the money would go away and you'd have to print new money. And so it's this bizarre system that's so counterintuitive, because I grew up believing like banks, I deposit my money in the bank and then the bank might lend that money out to somebody else to build a house or whatever. Kind of like if you ever watched It's a Wonderful Life and George Bailey explains sort of the banking model. That is always what I believed it to be. It didn't ever occur to me that the money was just simply printed out of nothing. And so this creates this culture of debt. And if you've been in the business world for a while and talked to people in business, like businesses grow based on debt. They nobody wants to use their own cash for stuff. So you often, if you wanted to acquire a company, you would figure out how to have as much of that as possible be done through loans. If you know anybody who does a lot of day trading or um, short-term trading, there's this concept called margin trading, where you go and you borrow money that lets you play with more funds than you had available. Even if you want to go to college, like a lot of people don't have cash to do that. So there's this whole student loan industry, like mortgages are loans. A lot of people don't have cash for cars, so they will often take out a car loan. Like this loan culture has like permeated our society in like an infection, like it's just everywhere. And if you try to make the decision that you do not want to participate in the debt world and pay for everything with cash, it's almost set up to be like risky. Like, for example, a lot of stores don't take cash anymore. So the modern day equivalent of paying with cash is kind of like using a debit card, right? Where I have cash in my bank account, and instead of using a credit card, which is sort of a loan system, I will go to stores and pay with my debit card, which is as close to getting to paying with cash without using physical cash. But there's a risk there. Somebody steals your debit card. If you've ever had that happen, they drain your bank account. It's a real pain in the neck to try to get that money back. I actually think it's kind of reckless to use a debit card because of that. So I often use a credit card simply because it provides me this protection against my money being taken, which again is just warped. Like we have this system that creates all these incentives for people to use the debt tools and not use cash. And it's so tempting when you have credit cards to I don't think about it. I'll just like swipe it, think about worry about it later type of thing. And I was much worse about that when I was younger and kind of very much living paycheck to paycheck, and sort of this culture of like, well, if I want it now, I can have it now, and I'll just put it on the credit card and I'll sort of figure it out later on. It creates this problem of not really understanding that like life is about balance and give and take. And if you're spending more than you've earned, like that's going to create problems for you down the road. And we just have this culture where debt is just everywhere and it's become socially acceptable. When I was a business coach, there's a lot of not so great marketing in that coaching world. And one of the lessons that coaches, including my coaches, would put out there is that if you're afraid to take on debt for your business, like you're never going to be successful. You have to be let go of this fear. You have to be willing to expand, and you have to take a risk on yourself. And that every smart business owner will understand the power of loans and leverage. And that if you're not willing to do that, you're going to be kind of punished. So you're sort of shamed into not you're shamed into taking on debt, even if that was not something you really wanted to do. And so I do not like this debt culture. I think it creates people a slave system where if you've been foolish enough, and I have been in my past, to get into debt that you can't really pay back easily, you become kind of a debt to this these payments. This absolutely happens with 18-year-olds who go off to college and they don't have the cash for it. So they take out loans. Sometimes these loans are very, very large amounts of money, like $100,000 or more. And now they have to spend years, if not decades, paying off this debt. And this is certainly the case if you do something like go to medical school and you have all these years of education where you're not really making a lot of money. You end up a prisoner to this debt system. I actually considered many, many years ago going to business school and getting an MBA. And at the time, I had a woman I worked for who had done that. And it was like 10 years later, and she's still paying off those loans. So I just knew that if I went down that route, like I was stuck needing to have a job that would support the debt. And that was a very limiting thing. And I just kind of at the last minute sort of freaked out and was like, I don't think it's worth it because I will be a prisoner to this debt for a long time. And I don't want my options sort of limited like that. So this is my very long-winded story explaining why this current money system is crazy and that it is all about debt, all about loans. And if you aren't careful, which I'm not judging anyone else because I've certainly done this, you can end up in this situation where you are now locked into something because you have to service this debt. And you walk away from debt in our system and you file for bankruptcy or your credit gets dinged, like there are serious painful consequences for that. Like it's not a joke. This system that is designed to keep everybody borrowing, paying it off, borrowing again, paying it off, and making sure you stay in your place. And if you just throw up your hands and say I'm out, then there's consequences. Um, so this is one of the things I think is really promising about the future of money. I'm not really going in any order on this stuff, is that I really strongly and confidently believe we are moving away from debt as money to assets are money. If you've heard people talk about the gold standard, that is an example of one kind of asset that could be used to back money. Gold has been used as money forever since the beginning of sort of humanity and commerce. And that gold, people just made the decision that gold is money. You could even say that, God made this decision, wherever you want to look at the origin of it. But regardless, for centuries and centuries and centuries, people have considered gold money. And that's really all you need for money to work, is everyone to agree that this is money. So if I have a gold coin and we all agree it's worth a car or whatever the value of it is, then as long as everyone is in agreement, it can function as this sort of exchange of value mechanism. And when you think about money in a very philosophical sense, money is energy. So if you think about what money is used for, like let's say I'm selling some sort of service, I will sell you this service, and in exchange, you give me money for it, right? And my service involves maybe my time, my ideas, my efforts. These are all kind of things that I would do. They are forms of energy, right? And so I give one kind of energy, and then in return, because everything is a give and take, there's an exchange in this particular situation. You're exchanging back to me a different form of energy. You could even make the argument that if I made physical goods that I sold, that those are all a form of energy, right? Like if you broke them down into their molecular components of hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, whatever, those are all going to be energy forms that are like put together in a particular way that create this physical product. And so now I'm selling you this packaged energy, and you're going to pay me in return for energy. So if you get at a philosophical level that everything is energy, including money, this is where like gold is a form of energy. You could have oil be a form of energy. You could even have this sort of carbon credit thing, which I have a lot of skeptical views on, but fundamentally saying that it's kind of looking at energy as money. And you are able to trade these carbon credits and use them in the same capacity that you would money. So looking at that, if we were to move away from debt being money to now assets being money, anything that is considered something of value that is universally agreed to have value could be money. So it could be diamonds, it could be silver, it could be oil, but we'll caveat that for a second. It could be real estate, it could be water. There's a lot of things. It could be a manufactured product like steel or wires or batteries or something. I don't know, like anything that you would barter for that has a decent shelf life could potentially be a form of money. Now, there's an arg. Now, let me talk about the oil thing. So, oil sounds like could be pretty cool to use as money because it's like liquid gold. Something that people refer to as a liquid energy source. The problem is there's like a lot of different grades of oil, and oil has to be produced or like processed, and there's it's not all the same. So it's not fungible and like money needs to be. So one barrel of oil is not necessarily exchangeable for another barrel of oil, depending on the grade and color and quality and all that stuff. I'm no oil expert, but there's not a universal oil, like in the same way there is kind of gold, like gold is gold. For the most part, diamonds are diamonds. Now there are grades within some of those things, but this is where this assets for money gets a little bit complicated. And we're all going to have to decide like how do we want, like what kind of money do you want in exchange? Would you take tokenized real estate as payment for your job? Would you take tokenized gold? Would you take tokenized diamonds? We're going to have the ability to make those decisions somewhat at an individual level, but in many cases it will be at the sovereign sort of national level, and not everybody makes those sort of day-to-day decisions. But the reason why I don't think we're going to move to a pure gold standard is that some countries are just kind of lucky that there's a lot of gold underground. And so if you are one of those nations that just so happens to have abundant gold underneath your sort of soil, then that's sort of a sweet deal for you. But what if you're a country that doesn't have gold, but you have something else like emeralds? Is it fair that, or I mean, is it fair for emeralds not to be used to back money? Not really. So this is this idea of a level playing field that I'm a big fan of, and I see playing out in a lot of different areas. But if things of value are used to back a currency, you can't just print money out of nothing. Now, I could go and dig up more emeralds and print new money based on those emeralds, but that's a lot of work. And if there's a transparency around it and there's some sort of vault where all these emeralds sit, or even it's understood that these emeralds are under the ground, it keeps a constraint on any one entity just printing money at will. It also shifts this sort of mindset from we're now spending money that exists versus this debt model. So I think we're going to see a world where a lot of different assets are considered money and they're used to back the money. I had an interesting conversation recently with a guy who works in the gold mining industry, and it very much shifted my perspective because I'd always assumed that if we wanted to back any currency with gold, you kind of have to like have this vault where all these bars of gold sit and are like barcoded and audited and all that stuff. And he made me he made this very funny sort of analogy, simplified it. He's like, right now we have this system where you go underground and you dig up this gold, you bring it up to the surface, you refine it, you make it into bars, whatever, and then you go and you bury it back under the ground in a different kind of vault. But it's really the same sort of idea that like the vault goes from being underground, brought up, manipulated, and stored underground. And this process of processing the gold is very disruptive to the earth, right? Like you have to use some pretty nasty chemicals to mine gold. Obviously, if you had a farm and all of a sudden now it's mined for gold, you're not going to be able to farm that land or have cattle graze or whatever because now you've dug it up and probably messed with the water supply and that kind of a thing. So his point was like, why is this even necessary? If I can be certain through some technology that the gold exists underground, is it really necessary to go through this entire process of turning it into bars and putting it back into another vault when could we simply back the money supply with gold that is still underground? You can then still farm the land. You can still graze cattle and you can still live in houses on it. And I was like, that is a great point. And so that I think is, and I don't have all the answers on that, but that's an interesting idea that assets can be used to back a money supply, even if those assets potentially remain underground. Now, there's a lot of questions about like making sure that the gold is really there and that you're not pretending there's gold and issuing money supply. So I did bring up some of those questions, and there is sort of technology and auditors who would do that because we don't want to end up in this situation where I pretend I have all this gold underground and issue all this money and it really was a lie. I mean, that's no better than the fiat system. So I think these important conversations are being had, but there's, I think, some fluidity as to how these future assets will be backing money supply. And you might not necessarily need to destroy all this beautiful land to unearth the gold just so you can go lock it up in a vault underground. Like what's really the point of all of that? So that is my first very strong belief, that we were going to have this world of asset backed money. And what we've been doing is watching this sort of changes to the banking system, this collapse of the banking system, almost with this anticipation that like something has to be destroyed before this new thing can be built. And this is where I've wrestled like emotionally with a lot of this is, do we have to see the first thing destroyed in this dramatic play out of events? And it's almost like a scary thing where, people I feel like they lose their life savings, or there's food shortages or even civil unrest. Like, do we have to go through that to have this new money system? And for a very long time, I did believe in this whole like Phoenix rising thing, and that you've got to burn it all down first before rebuilding it. And I'm not so sure that that actually needs to happen. I think there's another thing that was a reason why I stopped making videos for a while, is the entities that have been kind of controlling the financial system for centuries. They have one signature move that in the Creature from Jekyll Island, which you can't see anywhere here, but it's like the one lesson from Creature from Jekyll Island that I think is more important to remember than anything else, which is that group, I'll just call them the cartel, they always play both sides. They do it every time. Because listen, when you play both sides, you can't lose, right? Uh, and so they will divide, create left, right, up, down, conservative, liberal. There's always these sort of mechanisms to divide us in half. And they play both sides. And so for me, I was kind of a part of this like truther community where we were exposing all of these lies. And what I kind of had this awakening on, this a realization, is that that side is being played as much as the other side. And the reason I can tell that is, if my messaging to you is fear, if I am scaring you about either side, either like what the liberals are scared of versus what the conservatives are scared of, if my marketing to you is fear-based, I question whether or not that's controlled opposition. Because if I really wanted to help you and really wanted to get you excited about an amazing future, I very quickly need to have you focused on what that future looks like. How do we prepare for that future? What kind of leadership qualities we need in that future? What will business look like in that future? And instead, a lot of the truther community is just rehashing over and over all of these dark things that have happened in the past, with this justification that people are unaware, they need to be woken up. But what it does is it keeps people living in this state of like anger and frustration and almost despondency, where if you really break down all the stuff, the lies and all that stuff, and you're reliving that stuff on a daily basis, you are going to be in what I label a low vibration. You're going to be mad. You're going to think people suck. You're going to be paranoid that people are lying to you. You're going to be worried that everything's a trick and that we're being played, and that there's like Trojan horse of something coming in that looks good, but it's really bad. Like, there's a whole sort of level of paranoia and worry that I was absolutely a part of in this truther community, trying to figure out what's real, what's not. And it creates this anxiety, this worry that can actually cause problems. So another thing that I have spent a lot of time understanding recently is this ability of humans to manifest things. And I've known about manifesting for a long time. And a couple years ago, I kind of went down the manifesting rabbit hole, let's say, and I studied and read a bunch of books. But to me, it was very much like playtime. And I was trying to manifest like physical things like money and cars and like toys, essentially. And I wasn't really taking it that seriously. So it didn't really work. But this year, I've gotten some very strong lessons about manifesting, namely how to very easily manifest something you do not want by believing that this thing is true and internalizing that belief and putting enough kind of energy or emotion or time into that belief. You can absolutely manifest something you do not want. So I've seen, looking back in my own life, there's been times where I was in kind of a crappy situation and it looked like I was sort of a victim of something. But if I went back enough steps, I can see that, like, I believed that that was either what I deserved or inevitable or just the best I could do. And that belief system then led to me to make all these choices that took me into that place. So this is controversial because this idea of taking radical responsibility for where you are in life can sometimes be interpreted that, like, you're blaming yourself and you're making yourself feel bad. I don't see it that way. I see it that if you can understand that every crappy thing that has happened to you, for the most part, is a function of decisions that you have made and they all tie back to some crappy belief that you had, then you realize that if you change the belief system, you can totally change your life very, very quickly. And I have had this lesson play out for me very recently in multiple ways, that if I am willing to sort of stand up for myself and change a belief that I know is not true, but is still so embedded in me from so long ago, if I'm willing to do that, it often involves me doing something very uncomfortable that I do not want to do. But if I'm willing to do that, then boom, very quickly, the reality that I live in will change. And this is why I'm going to tie this back to this money system and to this truther stuff. In that, if you are sitting around all day long thinking about how screwed we are and how this group of, like, corrupt cabal people have done all these bad things, if that's where you're thinking about, you're going to create a world that is still part of that. That this could be the Klaus Schwab World Economic Forum, CBDC, 15-minute cities. You know, you don't get to go into a store without your vaccine passport thing. Like that whole, like, dark dystopian world. If you talk about that enough and think about it enough and believe that that is inevitable, I actually, without hesitation, think that you will end up in that place because your thoughts will lead you to make decisions that will ultimately end up manifesting that reality. So that's why I kind of checked out about that whole world. I haven't been making videos about this topic. People have asked me to be a guest on things, and I've been saying no to all of those because I don't want that stuff in my head anymore. Like, I do not want to be thinking about the sort of globalist agenda and all of these sort of nefarious things that they're pushing on us. Because what happens is when those things get inside you, they now operate in your subconscious, and you then, without realizing it, because we make so many decisions on autopilot, you will make these autopilot decisions that will manifest that version of the world into your reality. So I've talked a lot about timelines recently on my Twitter stuff. And to me, timelines, when I first thought about them, I thought of them like a linear thing. Like if you had a graph of, like, the history of something and it would start it out like with year 1, 2, 3, you think of this line that shows a linear progression throughout time. That's not really what I think timelines are at all. So I think if you look at this world like a video game and I am the player, someone is the person playing the game. So we can't see that person. That could be my higher self. You could call that God, the creator, whatever. Let's not worry about that label for just now. So I'm now this player in this video game that looks like this world. And this world can change depending on the settings that are on me as the player. So right now there'll be a whole bunch of settings. There'll be external things like, age, gender, hair color, weight, style, like taste in music, taste in food, all these sort of things that you could use to describe me. Then there'll be a whole set of beliefs. What do I believe about the world? What do I believe about myself? What do I believe about the people who are around me? What do I believe I have to do to earn XYZ? What are the skills that I have? What do I like to talk about? I mean, there are thousands of these, what I'm going to call settings. These are all, like, if you think about like a list of elements with check boxes, each of us have a whole lot of check boxes that describe us externally, internally, views, beliefs, thousands of these settings. Now, these settings will determine your reality. They will determine what you look like, how other people see you, the decisions that you make, the kind of job that you have, the food that you eat. Like, all of these things that are a part of your day-to-day world are determined by these settings. So this is how you can jump timelines, and what I refer to as hack the matrix is that if you figure out how to change these settings, sometimes the setting is pretty easy. Sometimes changing the setting is not, but the same principle still holds. If you can change those settings, you will change the world around you. Now, the thing that hung me up for a while is I was messing around with these settings and it felt like nothing was happening. There is a delay. Sometimes you change those settings and you feel it quickly. Sometimes it takes a while because you change the settings. What happens is you change the things that you emit, whether it's the words that you say, the sort of unspoken body language, the energies that you communicate. We're going to call that this like vibration level that you emit. And if you want to know more about vibration levels, read Levels of Energy by Dodson. It's here somewhere. This book, incredible if you want to understand this whole principle. So if you can change your vibration level, then you will change what you emit, and then people will react to you differently. I have no doubt at all this is true. I have spent the last couple of months understanding this, assessing it, testing it, and being blown away by it because it makes a lot of sense in theory, but it is totally different when you actually embody it and you see the things around you change. It's like kind of weird. I've had a couple of periods recently where I've sort of freaked out because I felt like I woke up in an alternate universe. Like people around me are just really different and I don't always know what to do about it. And then I realized like I did this. I manifested this new reality. These people are not necessarily different. What's different is they're reacting to me differently because we are all, especially if you have people that you're good friends with or close with, like we all kind of mirror each other in some way. And so if I put out something, what I get back will often be a mirror reflection of it. It's good to understand if something triggers you or upsets you or someone is mad at you, if you can look at this through the lens of like, what have I been emitting that would lead this person to react back to me that way? It can be fascinating. You can really understand a lot more about how the world works. And so this kind of ties into this concept that I think that's really important. If you are unhappy with how things are, learn how to change those settings. I'm actually going to be taking on some coaching clients who want to have my help doing that because as a third party observer, I can often very quickly see what settings people need to change. It's a little bit harder to do that for yourself unless you have someone who can do that mirroring process with you. Back to the idea of money. So if I want this world where we have asset backed money and this idea of competition in business goes away and this focus on profit margins, we just have a generally healthier society where we're more about contribution, we're more about giving and less about taking. I have to like embody this world like in every part of me. Like I have to think about it, I have to dream about it, I have to write about it, I have to talk about it. And this is how I will go on this timeline where this world becomes reality. And I understand that for some of you listening to this, you're going to think I'm insane and that your cognitive dissonance is going to be like, that's not how it works. Like the world is what it is. I just want to challenge you to expand your thinking and play around with this idea at a very small scale. And if you can change yourself, even if you are just consistently in a better mood than you normally are, or you change what you eat, like level up the food that you eat. If you're eating junk food, like stop that for like an entire month and just eat vegetables and fruit and things that are better for you. And just very astutely pay attention to how the people around you react. You'll be amazed. I mean, I was quite skeptical. I'm cynical. I'm an analyst. Like I don't come from a religious family. Like a lot of this stuff seemed like kind of crazy to me, but I made the decision I was going to test it all out and see what happened. And it's been freaking cool. Like I'm sold. Like I'm not going back to being cynical and skeptical because I now understand how powerful the human mind and heart when worked in combination are at creating a reality. So they're very confident that we're going to have a very beautiful future in terms of our monetary system going away from this debt system to something that is asset backed. It's going to change how business works. There's going to be less focus on profit and greed and these sort of the negative sides of capitalism, and we're going to just see it more as opportunity. But I don't know that we are all going to that future. This is the idea of split timelines. We all have different settings. And if your settings and my settings are so different, you're probably not watching this video because I'm not resonating with you and you're going to have stopped watching this after 5 minutes. But if you've made it to this point in the video, we are probably on a similar vibration level, meaning what I say to you makes sense and vice versa, which is why sometimes like if you're watching a news channel or you're reading a book and like no matter how many times I read the page, like it's not coming in. It's because we're not resonant. I'm not vibrating at the same level as that. And it just doesn't make sense. That's why some music will just like grate you and like you just can't imagine listening to it. You're just not on a harmonious vibration level with that stuff. So important to find people who vibe with you so that you're not traveling this crazy world alone. Understand you can change those settings. If you want me to help you, I might be able to. I'm very specific in the type of people I'm going to work with the coaching thing. So it won't be for everybody. But know that the stuff that you are thinking about most of the time will affect your reality. So if you are really sucked into this red pill truther stuff, my choice is like, I already know all the bad stuff about it. I don't need to talk about it or think about it or obsess on it anymore. It is not my responsibility or my calling to wake up other people. I actually really believe that we are all programmed by our higher self to wake up to this reality at a very specific point, which is why if you've ever tried to wake somebody else up, like it does not work because you can't change someone else's setting. You can only change your own settings. And that when to wake up setting is programmed into each person. I actually really do believe that after much trial and error of trying to actively wake up other people and getting frustrated. So don't worry about waking up other people. Focus on the world that you want to create. Think about what does the money system that you would love, how would that feel? What does it look like? How does it work? Get into the details on it so that you can literally imagine yourself in there. And while you might think that that's sort of fantasy role playing or whatever, it's not. Like you are figuring out how would that feel, which will change the settings within you. And you change those settings permanently, you will change the reality that you experience. So I know this might sound a little kooky to some of you. I know some of you this will resonate with very, very well. I think I'm very optimistic about the future. I think we're going to have a beautiful, glorious new earth. I think that some of us have specific roles to help guide people to that, which is what this video is about. Uh, and be careful of any voices that instill fear in you because that will lower your vibration, that will make manifesting harder, and it will potentially send you on a timeline that you don't really want. And I would pick the most amazing, most beautiful, glorious timeline you could possibly imagine. And that is, hey, if I'm wrong, you're just going to spend the next couple of months like in a state of bliss. And if I'm right, it actually could potentially change your world in an incredibly powerful, meaningful way. So, alrighty, I'll see you in the next one.